Hi, welcome to Tonnau Talks. My name is Dr. Carys I'm a Senior Specialist Educational Psychologist working for Neath Talbot Educational Psychology Service. And today I've got with me Caitlin Davis as our Assistant Educational Psychologist. And we're going to be talking today about fibs and tall tales. As you can see on the screen, there is our QR code, so you can scan that to gain access to our live sessions and also be able to find our other Tonnau Talks on YouTube. We're also live on Spotify and Amazon Music, so please check us out there and always follow us to help support our Tonnau Talks. So, Caitlin, we're talking about fibs and tall tales today. Interesting topic. I know a lot of our parents who come to our parent drop-ins will often talk about, times where their children are quite evidently lying, as they all call it. It's not a behaviour that parents like to see and can often feel a little bit worried about when our children tell fibs and tall tales. And we know that it has many different purposes, doesn't it? Telling lies.
Absolutely. And I think the difficulty with lying is I think we often associate it with like a negative thing. Like if somebody's a liar or they tell fibs or they're Tom Pepper, whatever you call it. I think we kind of attach a moral label to it. If somebody tells lies and it must be kind of, a bad person or whatever. But actually, when we think about it, everyone lies. It's a real universal experience. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
The scope of the lie ranges. There's obviously there's different extremes of lying.
Yeah.
But when we think about kind of fibs and white lies and all sorts of things, I think most of us, would probably lie every day on average, and it might not be these huge lies that we think of when we think about lying. It might be something like, telling somebody in the office that their hair looks nice when, it's probably looked better.
What you're trying to say, Caitlin. But yeah, no, I agree with you. And that's the thing. I think a lot of our parents kind of take for granted is that us as parents will lie to our children, and often that can be in a way to sort of protect our children from the truth. We'll withhold information from them. And let's not forget, we've got Christmas coming up. That's a big season of big tall tales that we tell our children.
Probably the tallest tale we tell our children.
You've got Elf on the Shelf now added to the mix, who is watching our children and reporting back to Santa. So, there's we need to think in terms of, the context of why our children. So why are they lying? What are they lying about? But also, what's the purpose of it behind it? And certainly today we're going to talk about what we can do as parents in terms of tackling this and understanding it, I think is the key thing here. As we know, it is something that adults do. As much as some won't admit that we do it, but we do, like you say, sometimes we do it to please others. Yes, your hair looks really lovely. I love the outfit, there's that common one that we, is very well known about. Does my bum look big in this? And obviously the answer to every time is no, it doesn't. But it's a way of kind of social acceptance in a way, and also, empathy is often coming into this. Now, as we know with empathy, that ability to see someone's point of view and relate to it, our children don't develop that till later on, in late sort of primary age. However, there's many reasons why children lie, and I think that's something that we can help explore as part of this Tonnau Talks today, isn't there?
Absolutely. It's, like I said, it's a universal experience, just like there's many reasons why adult lies, there's many reasons why children, lies, when it serves them many purposes, like you've said. And it's very important that we don't, when children lie, we don't see it as this kind of, this bad behavior and stuff like that, because actually it's really normal. Most, if not all, children lie, and it's actually a part of their development. Like
What do you mean by that, Caitlin?
So when I kind of actually lying is a developmental milestone. So it's, when a child starts to lie, we know that their development is kind of ticking on, because that's something that we're looking for, because it shows us that certain skills of theirs are starting to develop.
So we're talking in terms of like their creativity, but also their problem solving,
Yeah,
you
their
know,
cognition.
their empathy,
Yeah.
as we talked about. So it is something that we would expect children to do.
Absolutely. And the type of lies they tell us can actually indicate where they are in their development.
Yeah.
And we're really fortunate because obviously when a child is a lot younger, their lies are not so not so complex, you know, they're very easily kind of
Easy to spot.
oh,
Yeah.
absolutely, because and that's because where their brain is at that stage, you know, when we think about essentially we think lies are kind of introduced in children's development when they're around the age of 2 or 3. They start to kind of these are not kind of like consistent lies. These are really occasional. They're not very complex. They're not in much depth. The child's not even aware possibly that they're lying. You know, it's not an intentional thing.
Because I know a lot of like 2 to 3 year olds have that magical thing where,
Yeah.
gosh, I've had kids bring me like this magical pebble that's going to grant me wishes. Do you know what I mean? And,
Absolutely.
the look on their faces, like they think, they
Yeah.
they've got me hooked, and we go along with it, don't we, as adults, like, oh, wow,
Absolutely.
that's so wonderful. And, in a way, we're encouraging what some people would consider a lie, but a lot of us just see it as a way of connecting, isn't it? To talk imaginatively and creatively, that's what we kind of do with our 2 to 3 year olds, isn't it? In a
100%.
way, we encourage it.
And we have to appreciate at that age as well is their thinking's quite egotistical in the sense of they don't necessarily realize that other people have their own thoughts or their own perspective of things. So they very much think that, what they are thinking and seeing and doing, that you're exactly the same. We call it theory of mind.
Yeah.
They haven't really begun to kind of, or they're just starting to begin to develop that. So, they're not always appreciating that, that there's a truth and that you can see differently to them. And sometimes it's just because they want to connect with you and they want to kind of, like if you say you can see something and, they so desperately want to kind of have that relationship with you, they'll agree with it even if they can't. Because, they don't necessarily understand how that might be something that's kind of a non-truth or, the more complex kind of thinking around lying and the social element of lying, they haven't got a grasp on yet. And so it's a kind of a very unintentional thing at that age.
Yeah, and I think that's important for us to sort of recognize that it is unintentional. It's not for a purpose other than connection and that exploring that imaginative creativity sort of side of their brain. They're not yet developing those problem solving skills or that empathy. So it's not in a way to kind of divert someone's attention. In a way, it's more to draw someone's attention to themselves. And that's important in a way that a child might say, oh, look at this, this is magical, or I've just seen a fairy outside the car window. It's a way for them to try and get your attention and to have that connection, isn't it? And it's at that point where we kind of see it as more playful interaction rather than lying. And I think it's important for us as adults to try and understand developmentally where is our child, because a teenager saying, oh, I've just seen someone out the window that I know, that we know, and it's not there. It's important to kind of unpick, well, why would our teenager make that lie? So lying for a 2 to 3, 4 year old is very different from a teenager saying very similar types of fibs then in that way. And that's why I think it's important that we distinguish for our children as they grow, what is it accepted as part of their development, rather than an intentional lie in that sense.
I think just want to go back to something you said around that, like imaginative kind of lying in a sense of like, there's fairies in the garden, or, my imaginary friend Tim says that, kind of whatever. And kind of thinking about how that links to play at that age, and kind of we use a lot of those statements, you know, in our play in a sense of, oh, I'm a big scary monster and I'm going to eat you up and gob you up and stuff like that. And, you know, children kind of, they do mimic us. And so, you know, those lies, those imaginations that they are kind of expressing, you know, is very much kind of linked to their play at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's something that we need to sort of, you know, encourage, you know, that I don't want, you know, people listening to this to think that, oh no, I shouldn't be encouraging that kind of, oh, look outside, I can see, you know, a little dragon in the sky or something, because I think that's all part of really important connections and, you know, that play as well, that imagination building on that. And I think it's really important that parents know that, you know, part of interacting with their young child is about, you know, being imaginative and, you know, as someone may look at it, well, it's telling lies because there aren't fairies in the garden. You know, it's about how that is a sense of connection and growth and, you know, building on a child's creativity. I think as well, it's that's where we need to try and understand that, you know, not all lies are malicious in that sense, you know, or intentional, because as we know, children, as they grow, we were just talking now about that imaginative kind of stay in that stage and that playfulness. I think some kids will then get to a point where, you know, they're like 5, 6, whatever, and you know they are telling lies, and it's important for us to recognize that they're not always, you know, meant to deceive or intend to kind of withhold information. We often get kids at that age who talk about, you know, my uncle, you know, is a famous footballer, you know, and often it's drawing on that connection. They might be trying to kind of, you know, impress their friends because, you know, they know someone famous and, you know, they're going to be the next incredible football as well. And often that's linked to that start in development of that self-esteem. You know, who am I in my peer relationships? Where do I fit in? And I think it's important, you know, when our kids are developing, that they will use lies and fibs as ways to connect. And it's not in a way to kind of cause harm. You know, and I think that's something that as we see children grow, especially with ones that may be, you know, trying to kind of impress their peers, that does, or impress others, it is an indication of kind of what they're seeking in a way, is that social acceptance. And that's pretty typical at, you know, age 7, isn't it?
Absolutely. And again, remembering that they can't always consider other people's perspectives.
Absolutely,
so they can't recognize that's not a believable lie, you know, because if I'm telling you my uncle is, you know, kind of is Salah, then, you know, why would you not believe? You know, you don't know kind of what my life is like. So,
but also younger children would believe that.
Yeah, and they would, absolutely. And they get the feedback then of everyone going, oh my God, I can't believe it, you know, and that's really exciting, which and that's really good for their self-esteem and their identity as well, because, you know, identity comes into it. We're all very protective of our identity, how we see ourselves, you know, when we think about, again, at that age, around like, you know, kind of 5, 6, they start to maybe lie to avoid like consequences and punishment. And again, it's not kind of in the same way we might think with an adult, where if they lie about something like that, you know, they're not being accountable and stuff like that. But with a child, it's very different because essentially, one, they might be fearful of, you know, kind of the punishment, and they don't have the problem solving skills to go, oh, I broke the vase, so if I go and tell mum now and say sorry and we can glue it back together, they can't think that kind of that sequence through. So the most immediate, the panic reaction is to lie and say, no, I didn't have my football in the house and I didn't break a vase, and you know, and we might see that as being kind of deceitful, but it's not. It's again, it's thinking about that, what purpose that lie serves that child. It's identity protection in the sense of I'm not a bad boy or a bad girl because I broke a vase, you know. And it's to avoid that kind of that situation where they're going to be in trouble and it's going to be uncomfortable and unpleasant for them and they're going to have disappointed you and that's quite upsetting. So yeah, we do start to see those kind of you know, not avoiding consequences, but trying to lesser consequences.
you know, as we know, all humans will try to avoid things that are uncomfortable, aren't they? You know, we all want to fit in socially, you know, and want to be kind of kept in high regard by our parents, by our friends. And I think this is where that kind of lying does stay with children throughout, you know, teenage life, because again, teenagers are more likely to lie about things to avoid consequences. You know, because again, as we know with the teenage brain, they become very egocentric again, like our toddlers, you know, and they can also become somewhat catastrophizers. So it's in their mind better to avoid the consequence, because in their mind often they can feel that it might be a huge consequence that can be extremely detrimental to their social life, because again, to our teenagers, that is ultimately a highly important factor in their life, is how they're perceived within their social within their social peer group. And I think, you know, for our teenagers, lying is ultimately a defense mechanism, isn't it? Protects them, keeps them safe, because, you know, they wouldn't want to be held accountable and then be grounded, for example, and not be able to go to the next party, you know. So ultimately, for our teenagers, lying does serve a purpose.
Well, absolutely, and you picked up on the kind of the social motivation there as well. You know, as we become more socially kind of developed, as we become more socially aware, you know, we do start to see the more kind of social lying, you know. So we start to see those, you know, like those white lies we talked about in the beginning, where it's to preserve relationships, you know, that was a great goal, mate, when perhaps it wasn't. So, yeah, it's a really good idea to go as whatever to the school disco. You know, those kind of ones you start to, when you get to like, you know, late stage primary school, late childhood, and you start to kind of understand, you know, social interactions a bit more, and, you know, and understand how we kind of engage with people, and you start to develop or socialize. And then when we get to adolescence, you know, their lives are often very socially motivated, in the sense of it's either to kind of, you know, to preserve relationships, or to kind of get them into a place where they can continue those social interactions. So you find that teenagers lie a lot about like where they're going to be, who they're going to be with, and stuff like that. Because, and also, you know, again, it goes back to identity. It's preserving their reputation, and all that. When we think about the peer influence in teenagehood, you know, they are very much guided by their friends' perceptions. And so, you know, one way that does manifest is in, you know, those telling of those fibs about who they might be spending time with, who they might be with, so they can save face with their friends, and they can engage with their friends in a way that they're kind of socially motivated to, which, of course, as parents is very frightening for us, because, you know, they often with teenagers, you know, they think they're adults before their time. But again, it's, you know, it goes back to that context and that purpose that lie is serving, and it's not always a personal thing, in the sense of they are lying to get at us in some way, or to kind of, you know, target us in some way. It's genuinely what's motivating them in that moment, or what they're trying to protect or preserve.
Yeah, and we know with the teenage brain as well, risk taking is much higher at that age, and also poor impulse control, so that poor ability sometimes to say, no, I'm not going to participate in that because I think I might get in trouble for it. Actually, I'll just go along with the crowd, you know, and then lie about it afterwards, you know, and that might not be something that they consciously are aware of. It's something in the subconscious, and that's what I think is important. We recognize is that there's a lot of things our teenagers will do in order to preserve their, you know, privacy, their identity, their social status within their groups, because that's so important for them, you know. And we've got to understand that their brains aren't built in the best possible way right now in order for them to ensure honesty and openness and clarity and transparency, when in a way for them it's so important for that social acceptance, you know. So I think we need to kind of go easy on our teenagers, because their brains aren't equipped with the best skill set at the moment. You know, that will come in time as they develop, you know, their impulse control, their risk-taking behavior will, you know, decrease. But currently, I think we need to recognize that they're not built with the best set of skills currently, you know.
But I think it's also like important to keep them safe as well, because obviously, as we said, you know, we know some of these lies can be, you know, can put out teenagers in quite dangerous situations. And so, you know, it is important to have those boundaries and to have those expectations and kind of boundaries essentially in place, so that, you know, if that lie has put them in an unsafe position, and that's not something that's repeated and it's made clear to them that's not something that's okay.
Yeah, and I think it's really important here to reflect on, you know, children that are encouraged to keep secrets.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that is, again, you know, our younger children are very easily kind of manipulated in a way to keep secrets that they shouldn't keep, you know, so that again isn't necessarily lying, it's withholding information. But I think, you know, we will go into this about how important it is to kind of help our children to share information, especially, you know, it's about making them aware that keeping secrets is not a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, and again, for our teenagers, that message to be, you know, reiterated again clearly to them that, you know, yes, they may want to engage in certain activities and be encouraged by maybe peers or whomever, but actually, you know, ultimately our role as parents is to keep our children safe. So we need to have those conversations with our children throughout childhood, not just when they're kind of, you know, more independent as teens, you know. And again, the same when it comes to technology and devices, we need to make sure that we do have that clear understanding that, you know, keeping secrets, you know, or lying about certain things that are going on social media, or, you know, with their technologies, is really important that we help them to feel able to tell us when things don't feel quite right.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. And one thing I just wanted to pick up on that in safety, and it's kind of, it's different in the way we were talking about it, but sometimes children can lie to try and keep themselves safe. You know, when we think about children who have maybe experienced trauma, adverse childhood experiences, we don't know what their experiences of telling the truth and what that means to them. And, you know, if they had done something in the house, you know, what the reaction to that would have been. And so actually telling lies or fibs or whatever can actually be an attempt to protect themselves, to kind of, or, you know, in a similar sense, to kind of portray a different life to what they've had. You know, sometimes it can be, and we do find sometimes with children who have had, you know, adverse childhood experiences, they can do that, like we talked about earlier, around, you know, kind of my uncle is, or, you know, kind of my best mate is whoever, because actually the reality of their life is so distressing for them that, you know, that they want to project a different narrative, a more positive narrative.
And that feels good for them as well, doesn't
it?
You know, we often get, you know, I've had some parents come to our drop-ins and sharing about how sometimes their child will, you know, report to the teacher as they go in that they're injured or they don't feel well, you know, and the parents really worried about the impact of that, you know, because the child is well and it's not injured, but actually it's about what's the purpose of this lie, isn't it? You know, it's like what's driving that, and actually it's that child needing to be seen and acknowledged, and actually that child needs more attention than a child who isn't coming in complaining of illnesses and injuries, you know, because again, you know, children, when we think about, especially those children who are in care, you know, they've had adverse child experiences, you know, likely, and we got to try and understand the context of what these lies are actually giving them. So is it giving them that chance for attunements, you know, for an adult to prioritize them, to care for them, to show them that kind of consideration, and actually it's about trying to unpick that. And I think that's important when it comes to, you know, we're going to talk about this now, is about what we do about children lying. It's about understanding what does that lie serve? What's purpose does that lie serve? What is it achieving? And I think that's really important when we're trying to understand children's, fibs and tall tales. What purpose is it serving? And it's important that we understand developmentally where is our child developmentally. Yes, they may be 6 or 7, but are they still functioning at maybe a 3-year-old where that magical kind of thinking still lies? So I think it's important that before we tackle our children's fibs and tall tales, that we, number one, understand the purpose of that lie and understand where they are developmentally.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking in terms of things that we can do, Caitlin. What would you say is really important when we're noticing that maybe our child is telling some fibs and tall tales? What can we do about that?
So I think sometimes we think we have to take a reactive approach when our child is kind of telling fibs and tall tales. And it doesn't necessarily have to, like with most things in, development, children developing, we can lay the foundations, much younger. It doesn't necessarily have to be, oh, my child told a lie, I must kind of jump on this and put all these things in place, So I'd kind of advise to kind of start from the foundations, I'd advise that you model honesty yourself. It's really important. Obviously, age appropriately, we have to be mindful of what our children can understand, what they can cope with or manage in that moment. But I think being honest with our children from, the get-go and modeling that honesty is going to be really, really important. Our children learn from us.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're little scientists, they're watching us. And I know I don't want to put pressure on, kind of thing. But they are watching us, they are learning from us, they're taking cues from us in a sense of, what's right or wrong, or how do we cope with situations. And I think if we set that model of honesty of, we are an honest family, we tell the truth. Mum and dad tell the truth, whoever, carers tell the truth, then I think that is we're still going to see lying. I'm not going to say, you put that in place and, a child will never lie. But it's kind of, it's put those foundations down of that kind of, that appreciating honesty and being honest, and, it's setting that up. And another thing I think is keeping an open conversation. I think this is true of anything, keep an open conversation with your child about, telling the truth, and it's important. It can keep you safe, and, that conversation around dispelling some of the fear around, when we talked about being scared of if they've broken something or stuff like that, so if you have those conversations about, we're not going to be mad at you, just let us know what's happened, we can work through it together. So I think keeping that open conversation from a young age is really important, because when their brain starts to dip their toes into lying and thinking about these things and those nuanced and kind of complex situations we talked about within their development, then they've got that kind of that background, that conversation to fall back on as a sense of guidance and a sense of kind of maybe dispelling their worries, or encouraging their problem solving skills, all of those things. So I just and I bringing it back to what you said, Car, around the safety element of lying. If we're having those conversations about being truthful and open and honest, it can help safeguard our children in those situations where maybe somebody is encouraging them to keep secrets or to withhold or not tell the truth, which actually can be really detrimental and harmful to our child.
And that's the thing, isn't it, with modeling honesty? It is about trying as much as you can as a parent to be honest within reason, because obviously there are extenuating circumstances that sometimes you do have to withhold information from our children. But I think it's sometimes like when you've broken the vase, for example, going, oh my gosh, I feel terrible about this. I really don't want grandma to get upset, but I'm going to have to tell the truth. And I know that she's going to be okay with that. And it's about helping them to see that actually experience challenges,
Yeah.
that you have opportunities where, you know, you could tell a lie at this point, but actually that's not going to be the best thing, and that you're going to be brave and you're going to tell the truth, so that children can see that, oh yeah, those funny feelings that I have when I do something wrong, mum or dad has them too. Because unfortunately for our kids, they often see us as like, we've got it all together, we're perfect, we never do anything wrong. Far from the truth. I know some of us parents do try and maintain that high standard, but it's not real, you know. And I think that's what's really important for our kids to see us actually. Yeah, do you know what? I get funny feeling in my tummy sometimes that makes me feel nervous and worried. And actually, I don't want to go and tell grandma that I've broken the vase, because I don't want to upset her, because that will make me upset. But I'm going to have to tell the truth, and it's hard, but I will tell her the truth. And because that role modeling is not only emotional regulation, but it's also problem solving skills as well. And these are really important things for children to learn, because ultimately lying is to avoid those uncomfortable feelings. So that's part of poor emotional regulation coping mechanisms. But also it's about, I don't have the problem solving skills to know what to do with this, so I will lie. You know, so that's why it's important for us as parents to model problem solving, but also modeling that emotion regulation, you know, in a way that emphasizes the difficult feelings and the uncomfortableness of that, and also following through with a more positive, you know, problem solving technique, you know, by telling the truth. And I think that's really important when we're thinking about our teenagers.
Yeah.
Because ultimately they will often lie as a way to avoid those consequences. And I think that's where we need to be able to say to our teenagers, look, you know, I'm wondering whether or not you told the truth there. I just want to let you know that that's okay. Let's start again. I'm not going to hold it against you. You're not going to get into trouble. I just need you to tell me the truth.
Yeah.
You know, and I know it's hard to get that. And I know it's easy sometimes just to tell a lie. But it's really important to me that you just give me the truth here, you know, because that is being honest and frank with your teenagers, isn't it? And that's modeling good kind of communication. That's showing empathy, because you understand. Yeah, do you know, I get it. You know, I get that the easier option sometimes is to lie, but actually right now it's really important that you tell me the truth, you know. And I think that's to have those, you know, what you said there about modeling honesty and having those open conversations, to continue those throughout their development. That message needs to be repeated to them constantly, because the purpose of a child's lie changes as they age, as we talked about that. And I think our teenagers especially need reminding of that, because it's really important for them to feel supported and listened to, because ultimately our teenagers often feel invalidated by us adults. They always are saying things that remind us that they feel invalidated, such as, you don't get it, you don't understand, what will you know? You know, we get those comments, you know, given back to us by our teenagers because they feel misunderstood. And that's why it's important for us to have those open and honest conversations, so that they can see that we, you know, help me to understand. That's my sentence when talking to a teenagers: help me to understand what's going on here. I need you to explain it to me. You know?
Yeah, and it's about that praise as well, I think, is when they do tell the truth.
Yeah, thank you for telling me the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, you know, when we think about, I think for me, it goes back to like old school behavioralism, doesn't it? You know, it's kind of, you know, you punish bad behavior, blah, blah, blah. But actually, you know, what we're starting to understand now is actually you get more positive response when you encourage the behavior you want to see.
Absolutely,
You know, if a child kind of is telling you the truth, you know, make sure you're praising them for that. No, like you said, thank you. I know that was really hard for you to do, but I really appreciate you telling me the truth. You know, it's like, you know, we can never guarantee our child won't get in trouble. Because we don't know what they're lying about, you know. If they've smashed the back window or whatever with their football, you know, ultimately they're going to get in trouble from a football in the house. But it's really important that you let them know that you appreciate them telling the truth of the situation, and like they're not in trouble because they told the truth.
Yeah.
They're in trouble because they were doing something that they shouldn't have been doing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we can set boundaries and praise at the same time. We don't have to be kind of like, oh, you know, thank you so much for telling me that. We're just going to ignore the fact that, you know, I'm going to have to spend however much pound on a new window.
Yeah.
We can praise them for actually, you know, thank you so much for being honest with me. I really appreciate that. However, unfortunately, we are going to have to put in place this boundary because you did something that I'd asked you not to do, or you know that you shouldn't be doing. So, you know, it's really positive to praise, but don't feel like you can't set boundaries when you're praising as well, because you know those two things can exist.
And it's important, and it's important here with our young children, the ones who want to please as well. If we're praising too much of this, you know, telling the truth, just be mindful they might come out with the truth when you don't necessarily want it, such as, you know, when you get in the shopping queue in Tesco, why is that person so fat? You know, it's like, you know, it's important for our little ones as well. We go, yes, you know, it's really important to say the truth. However, you know, there are kind of
times and places.
Absolutely, yeah, because, you know,
mindful.
Yeah, you don't want to tell grandma that, you know, her new cardigan doesn't look great. But yeah, it you know, that's jokes aside, but I think it is important for our children to understand that there are times where we don't say what's on our mind because it's socially inappropriate. It's okay to, you know, to disagree with someone, absolutely, to have your own opinion, but sometimes we need to share that in a empathic way.
Absolutely.
But and I think, you know, when we're talking about, you know, praising children when they aren't being honest, you know, that is really, really important, because when you're praising them for telling the truth, you're doing it in a calm way. And I think that is essential as part of this approach to, you know, trying to support our children not to tell lies. Is if you're calm, then that fear of withholding information or lying is much more reduced for them. And I think sometimes, yes, Caitlin, when a ball goes flying through your living room window, it might be a hard time for you to remain calm, you know, understandably. But I think in certainly it can be frustrating, especially when a child is lying consistently. You know, and especially when I think about, you know, parents can get very frustrated, especially with our little ones, when they're telling tales quite a lot of the time. And I think it's so important that, you know, we remain calm, because it can be very frustrating as a parent, because it's a behavior that you don't want. Often with our younger children as well, it's quite clear they are lying, because ultimately the depths of their lies and the, you know, ability to falsify information can be quite difficult at that age, or those ages, you know. And I think it can be, you know, frustrating, you know, for siblings, older siblings, when their younger siblings may be telling fibs on them, you know, it can cause conflict. And I think sometimes it's important to just take that deep breath. And I always say this in all of our Tonnau Talks for parents, is whenever we start to communicate with our kids, check in with yourself, you know, because yes, do you know what, this is really frustrating. It could be something that's been going on for a long time, or these lies could be becoming quite detrimental. I think it's important that we check in with ourselves. Am I in the right frame of mind now to challenge something like this? Because ultimately, if you're not calm, it's likely to cause the child to withhold information more, or lie further and dig that hole, isn't it, into, you know, more deceit, you know. So I think remaining calm and collected is, you know, really important for our parents. And it's hard, it's a challenge, you know.
Oh my goodness, of course it is.
And it's just showing that curiosity, isn't it? Instead of getting angry. And it's about that wondering, you know, what's the driver of this lie? You know, a child lying at age 4 or 5, the driver of that might be completely different to a child who is 13 and lying. You know, and it's important that we try and remain curious about, okay, first of all, check in, am I feeling calm? Now, why do I think that they might be lying? Because ultimately children don't lie to be malicious. You know, that is not the number one driver. There are many drivers, as we talked about, you know, is it for social acceptance? Is it to try and avoid punishment? You know, we need to try and unpick that and try and see from their perspective why they may have said that lie before we go in and tackle it. Because if we tackle it with kind of challenge, ultimately what our children are learning from that is actually, I need to lie better and not be caught. And that's what we want to avoid with our children, is not the outcome that when I get caught lying, I get into trouble, I'm misunderstood, therefore I'm going to lie better.
Yeah.
You know, and we don't want that. We want our children to go, yeah, do you know, I did lie. And that's and for us to say, yeah, I get it. I get why you lied. You know, you wanted to avoid getting into trouble.
It's creating a safe space to tell the truth, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, that sometimes, you know, that's the most important thing, is we want the truth to feel safe, and our children to feel safe enough to entrust us with the truth, and not kind of have those, you know, distressing experiences or negative experiences when they do so.
And often I will say, you know, look, I'm wondering if there might be another reason why this has happened. You know, say, for example, I've heard a lie, or that I think there's a lie, you know, ultimately. I'll say, right, do you know what? Do you want to go away? Have 30 minutes now or whatever. Go and have a think about things. Because what I'd really appreciate is hearing the what I believe could be more of a truthful version of events, you know. It's often with our children that the lie is not going to be something completely ridiculous and outlandish, because we'd spot that easily. It's the ones that we challenge tend to be the ones that we're not too sure about if we've had the whole truth and nothing but the truth, you know. And I think that's where it's really important that we give our children an opportunity to go away and think of a narrative that is more truthful, rather than exaggerated claims or withholding information. And that's what ultimately lies are, either exaggerations or withholding information. And I think if we can give our children time to have a think, because that gives them the opportunity to start thinking about problem solving skills. Now I'm talking about children are much older. Our younger children, it might be helpful for you to sit with them and go, look, I'm wondering whether or not you might have had the ball in your hands and you felt it was a nice idea to throw the ball in the living room, you know. And, you know, as we know with our little ones, their coordination skills aren't great. But I'm sure we've all seen videos online where children are watching telly, swinging something round and it flings at the telly. And it was not intentional. It's just very poor timing and aim, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And it's about offering our children that opportunity to have that out. It's like, I get that it was an accident. I get that you don't want to break the windows. I get that. You know, and it's given them that opportunity to see a way out of going, yeah, I didn't want to break the window. You know, okay, we know that, you know, because ultimately what they're trying to do is protect themselves, you know, and they don't need to protect themselves with a lie.
And again, thinking about kind of modelling, that would be a perfect opportunity to model that problem solving as well, because once you kind of have that conversation, you can say to them, I wonder what we could do differently next time. You know, I wonder if kind of, obviously you'd hope they're not swinging around wherever they're swinging around and smashing into TV, you know, and we'd hope they'd learn from that. But should that happen again, you know, we've had a conversation now where, you know, you don't need to tell a fib about this, you know, and I understand why, and it was scary. If this happens again, what do you think you could do? What do you think you could do differently? Could you come and tell mummy? You know, could you come and kind of, you know, so you can view moments where they have lied as opportunities for learning as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And opportunities where they can see a positive outcome. Because ultimately, that is what they're fearful of, is the negative outcome. And we can be like, you know, look, this hasn't ended up bad. I know that you're in trouble for breaking the window, but you're less in trouble now because you've told the truth. You know, and that's really important. You know, and you deal with the window situation, that's separate. And it's about, like you said earlier, Caitlin, it's about praising that when they do tell the truth. So if they do eventually tell the truth, praise that. Like, I get that when I first asked you about it, you lied because you were worried. And now you've told the truth, and I really appreciate that. I really value, because that's tough. What can we do next time? And it's like what you said about that problem solving for the future. Do you know, next time it might be easier if you tell the truth. Even though it's hard and you're worried, actually this could be better. And I guess that ties into like offering children to say the truth. You know, offering to say, do you know what? Even if you did kick the ball out the window intentionally, but you didn't think it would break the window, I can understand that. And they might nod then and go, I was, because curiosity, especially with our younger children, what happens if I...
They're learning, they're little scientists, you know?
Honestly, they're things that I wonder what it'd sound like if I kicked this ball out the window, you know? You know, they're so curious without those kind of, you know, preemptive problem solving, you know, where it kicks in with us, we go, yeah, I could break the window though, so I won't do it. Our little ones don't have that yet.
It's, you know, it's that, like I said, again, it goes back to problem solving. It goes back to that internal voice. Like you said, it says, maybe I shouldn't do this because I've got enough experience to know what happens if I was to do this. Children don't necessarily have that experience.
No.
So it ends with, I wonder what happens if I do this. And then they do it because their brain needs to know what happens if they do that. So then if they have smashed the window, their brain goes, oh, okay, so a window smashes if I kick a ball, right? Which I know it sounds really strange when you're saying out loud, but remember, this is their first time on Earth. It's the first time that their brain is thinking and experiencing. And so they I think sometimes we take the knowledge we have for granted in the sense that we assume children have the same knowledge as us. But they don't. No. They're learning. They don't know what's going to happen.
And the same goes for teenagers, Caitlin, because ultimately it's the first time their friend has said, come and stay over my house. But actually, I'm going to stay over your house and we can go camping or wherever it may be, or we can go to that party. Ultimately, that's the first time that teenagers probably had a conversation like that. You know, they're desperate to fit in socially. Again, that social side and that egocentric side is so strong in their brain development as teenagers. Their impulse control, so they're more inclined to take risks. Okay, and then that kind of empathy and thinking in terms of problem solving skills isn't as highly developed as those other parts of the brain. So even though they do have empathy, they do have problem solving skills, they're not as developed as much as those kind of that social need for interaction and that impulse control. So therefore they are more likely to go, yeah, okay, I'll do that. You know, and that's where it's really important to understand that, yes, do you know what? They're 14 years old, they should know better.
They don't. And they don't think for a second you're going to phone the mother of their friend and check
they don't think we've got problem solving skills either.
Forget that you've got them on Instagram or maybe not you, because maybe they're smart enough to have blocked you, but a sister or a cousin or a brother has them. So when we think about it, I think that's where sometimes the maliciousness comes in there, because we think, well, they must have known we were going to find out. They don't. They can't think that far. They one, because they haven't got experience that situation. Two, but it doesn't come to them that you know that there might be steps you take as an adult that's going to kind of foil what they think is a genius plan. And you know, I think we've all been there as teenagers, but we thought we've had a genius plan, and I've been shocked and appalled to find out that my parents have
caught you out.
Kind of, I'm like, wow, I'm shocked that they've managed to kind of foil my plans.
I know.
But again, it's because the brain is learning and it's adapting and it's experiencing and it's doing the best it can with the knowledge and experience it has at that point in their development.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, it's like, it's remembering back to maybe the things that we did as teenagers and thinking, you think you're invincible. You think, how have they found that out? Forgetting that, you know, our own parents had social lives and, got up to mischief as well, you know. And I think it's important to understand that, you know, a lot of these fibs and lies, especially as teenagers, aren't meant for malicious intent at all, or to disrespect. In fact, they're to avoid all of that, because that's why they're lying. You know?
Yeah, they often want to be able to do the things and have the autonomy that they're striving for, whilst also maintaining their relationship with you.
Yeah.
And as adults, we can reflect and go, oh, there's a better way to do that by telling the truth and thinking of a plan. But for a teenager, often all they can think in that situation is, I know what I'll do. I lie.
Yeah. Because again, we've got to be mindful about one of the biggest things, very negative feeling and emotion that our children can experience is shame.
Oh, absolutely.
And again, that's something that a lot of our trauma, children have experienced trauma, they will avoid that feeling of shame so much that lying is far easier of a solution than telling the truth. So it's really important to note that, if we do have any foster carers listening, that, understanding that our children who, often are in care, will have experienced adverse childhood experiences, and will be more likely to avoid those toxic feelings of shame and guilt, and lying is a far easier solution, sadly, for them. So it's important that we understand in the context of, why they are lying, what's the purpose of it. Well, actually, sometimes for them, it's the easier option, sadly. And that's where, we need to build on their self-esteem, their value, their sense of self-worth, and, maintaining that supportive caring environment that, our foster carers are doing a fantastic job of doing. Right, so I think we have talked so much, and I think it's really important for us to do our usual Tonnau top tips for our parents listening here. So, Caitlin, do you want to tell our parents our Tonnau top tips for fibs and tall tales?
So I think, remember that telling fibs and tall tales is normal. As much as we don't like it and it makes us feel uncomfortable and it makes us worry, it is a part of development. It is a part of human life. It's a universal experience. And it doesn't mean that our child or your child is malicious or deceitful or a liar by nature. Again, it's thinking about the purposes. And I know we've really gone on about this in this, but it's because it's so important that you think about the why in the situation. Why are they lying? What is it serving them? Be calm and respond with curiosity. Like we said, we want to create those safe spaces for our children to tell us the truth and to kind of be able to explore alternatives to lying. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we are calm with them, which we know is so difficult in the moment. But, check in with yourself before you respond to any of these kind of behaviours. Engage a child in conversations about being honest and lying throughout their development. Talk to them, model honesty and problem solving skills and all of the things that is going to support them to not feel like they have to tell a fib or a tall tale in that situation. And finally, don't be too hard on yourself or your child. This is really important, have some compassion for yourself. We understand that some situations it's going to be really hard to keep calm, okay? You would be fuming if, like we said, the example of, a ball going through your window, and you might respond in a certain way in that moment, but there's an opportunity for repair after that. So if you have responded in an angry way, don't be too hard on yourself. Recognize that there's an opportunity to revisit that conversation in a calmer way where you can do that repair, and you can say, I'm really sorry I lost my head then, I was really shocked about what happened and I'm really angry. However, I appreciate now that you've been honest with me, and I'd like us to have a conversation about how we can go forward. And your child as well. It is important that you maintain boundaries and expectations around lying behaviours, particularly as they get older. And like we said, those lies can impact their safety and their well-being. But ultimately, at the end of the day, remember, just to be curious and to work out actually, that the lie isn't malicious. It's actually it's to kind of to serve for something.
Yeah, and I just want to come in here, Caitlin, as well, and just to, remind our parents about those ones that are like the tall tales, the exaggerated claims, because they can be quite frustrating when your child is constantly coming up with these exaggerated claims, and people around them want to say, oh, that's a lie, don't be so silly, that's never happened, you know. And I think what I'd like to reflect on is actually the purpose of a child exaggerating claims, you know, for example, my uncle is a footballer, whatever, you know, is about them wanting that social acceptance. And I think that's what we need to do, is if we can find that the purpose is about social acceptance, or, you know, mentioned about the child going in with, you know, false claims about being injured and wanting that kind of connection with the teacher. I think it's about, okay, let's understand what the purpose of this tall tale is. Is it for the social acceptance? Is it for, you know, that you know, extra care and attention? Feed it. That's what I'm saying. It's like, don't ignore, don't dismiss, don't challenge. You know, it's about, do you know what? I can see that you need a hug. You know, if they're coming and saying, I got a bad arm, come here, I've missed you, you know, put your arm around them, you know, come in, let's have a chat. And it's about giving them that kind of care and need that they're looking for and seeking, rather than either challenging, no, you haven't hurt your arm, your mum has already said you're fine. You know, ultimately what we're teaching them there is to lie better, you know. And we don't want that. Actually, what they need is, you know, especially for children that lie about, you know, family members being famous, whatever, it's about social acceptance, and we need them to feel more socially accepted within our environments, from them just being their wonderful self, you know. And it's about recognizing that, do you know what, that would be so exciting if your uncle was a footballer. I know I'd feel excited too. I wonder what other things in our lives excite us. You know, what about when we go to, you know, Auntie Jo's house, and, you know, and she bakes cakes with us? That's really exciting too. And I love that, you know. And it's about giving them that opportunity to have an alternative, which is the truth, isn't it? Instead of them saying, look, you're lying, that's not the truth. Because that can be quite upsetting for some children, and damaging in a way that we don't want them to then revert to trying to lie better. You know. Thank you, Caitlin. I've really enjoyed today's session. We'll wrap it up there, and diolch yn fawr. Thank you for joining us today on our Tonnau Talks, telling fibs and tall tales. As you can see on the screens there, please scan those QR codes if you'd like to have access to our other sessions that we have on YouTube, on Spotify and Amazon Music. But also we've got another QR code there, which would be really grateful if you could ask us a question. So we got our new section of our Tonnau Talks, which is called Tonnau Tyfu, which is growth. And we want all our parents that have a question about child development, anything that we've talked about in the past, or anything you'd like us to talk about, please scan that QR code, because that will give you access to our online form where you can ask a question, or even give us some tips on what we can talk about in the future. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.